right, Gophers fall to Iowa 31-14 in week 4 for the Battle of the Flood of Rosedale. Disappointing performance. Some instant takeaways. Everyone knows that second half was utterly horrendous. And I think given the context of it being a winnable football game against a comparable football team in a rivalry situation, after you're leading 14-7 at the half, that realistically could have been one of the worst halves of football for Minnesota under PJ Fleck. Just right off the bat, Iowa outscored Minnesota 24-0 in that half. The total yardage was 227-66. The Gophers had 22 offensive plays and 66 yards. So that is 3 yards a play. Iowa had 29 rush attempts and 6 pass attempts. So that is 25 offensive plays. So they had about like 6 yards per play in the second half. So, but what happened? And I think the biggest thing is a lack of adjustments. Kirk Ferentz and the Iowa staff showed adjustments. The first half did not look good for them. The Gophers looked great in the first half. They outgained Iowa 222-107. It was 14-7. The only thing Iowa had in that first half was the Max Brosmer interception, and that prompted the touchdown. Iowa was able to do a little bit on the ground, but they looked overmatched. The Gophers had them on their heels. They just needed to come out of the half and go for the jugular, so to speak. End the game. Ice the game. That's what they needed to do, and they didn't do that. They came out and they had 3 straight runs to start the second half, and in the first half, they had 10 total runs. They just went away from what was working in the first half. That was the most puzzling thing. I was thoroughly impressed with the first half game plan. They were doing stuff that this team and this program hasn't done. They were leaning on the pass. They were trusting Max Brosmer. The last 2 drives of the first half were arguably the 2 most impressive drives that he's had so far this year. He ended the first half 11 of 13 passing. The first scoring drive, he was 7-7 for 69 yards and a touchdown. He looked like he was all he was built up to be and more. And there was so much to like going into the half. And that's what makes a game like this so disappointing from a fan's perspective, from really anyone watching, and anyone that has any sort of rooting interest in Minnesota. PJ Fleck's in an interesting situation because his job is safe. He has some of the best job security in the country. He will be the head coach of the Gophers for as long as he wants to be, and I don't think this loss really impacts it much in the short term or even the long term. But he just needs to change his best. That is something that he preaches with his whole team, and it's something that he has not shown. This routinely happens. It happened against North Carolina. This game script was so similar. The Gophers were a little bit better in the first half than they were against North Carolina, but they were worse in that third quarter. That third quarter was one of the worst quarters of football this Gophers program has had under Fleck. There was nothing good. Missed tackles, penalties, no offensive explosiveness to show for. My biggest gripe and concern and worry with this offensive performance in this game was Darius Taylor. He had 11 carries or 11 touches. I just don't know how that happens in a game like this. Marcus Major had 9 touches. He had 4 catches and 5 carries. So it was pretty split. I like the passing. Pass the ball. You had 37 pass attempts. Max Brosmer, he can sling it. He can at his best. We saw the second half he was not at his best, but that's just such a drastic change. And after a game like this, I still think they're going to be competitive in a lot of games they play this year. I think they're going to be competitive against Rutgers, against Illinois, against Wisconsin, against Maryland, against UCLA. So there's Rutgers, Illinois, 5, 6 games right there. So you're getting 6, 7 wins in there. But they could also lose all those games. And they could have a performance like today. Now, the Michigan game next week, that's going to be tough. On the road, they showed they can't stop the run right now. They couldn't do it against North Carolina. Omarion Hampton and Caleb Johnson, arguably two of the best running backs in the country. Michigan has one of the best running backs, and it's not Donovan Edwards. If you haven't been watching them, today against USC, Khalil Mullins had 159 yards, 2 touchdowns. So it's going to be the same thing next week. That's Big Ten football. PJ Fleck said that after his press conference, but it's a systemic and a program issue right now. It's not a team issue. And I think you could even tell in this game. Max Brosmer has the talent, and he's not the issue. It's a game plan. The team just looked so lost in the second half. Like they were looking at their head coach. They're like, what do we do? And I think that was the difference in this game. Kirk Ferentz, one of the most tenured head coaches in the country, he knows what to do in those situations. If you take out the 2019 season, PJ Fleck has just not shown that he knows what to do in those situations. He is good at acquiring talent, and he's proven that. This team, it was not a talent issue tonight. And you could see that in the first half. When this team's at their best, they can make a top 25 caliber team like Iowa look like they didn't belong on the same field in the first half. They put on a good old whooping, and then it completely flipped. They got way too content, and they just sat on their laurels, and they're like, 14-7 lead, we'll be okay. And PJ Fleck, in classic coach speaks fashion after the game, said it was an execution issue. It's on to the next for this Gophers team. PJ Fleck's going to be the head coach until the end of the year. He's going to be the head coach probably next year, unless he takes a different job. But he just needs to change his best. This is a performance that was just not up to par with anything you want, and genuinely one of the most disappointing games in the PJ Fleck era for Gophers football.